Okay, so now that we know how to how to simplify radicals in the square root, sometimes we're going to have fractions, and we don't want radicals, aka square roots, in the bottom of fractions. So we have to rationalize the denominator. The denominator is the bottom of the fraction. So that means we have to get rid of the square root from the bottom. So it's going to go from a fraction with a square root in the bottom, and it's going to turn into a fraction that just has a regular number on the bottom, no square roots. So how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to multiply the top and bottom of the fraction by the radical, the one that's in the bottom. So maybe we add that in the bottom. So if this is my fraction, I have the square root on the bottom, and I want to get rid of it. So I'm going to do times square root of 3 on the bottom and on the top. So when I do that, it's kind of like when we're doing like numbers with letters and like combining like terms and stuff. Anything that's a radical times a radical, you can multiply the numbers on the inside. But if it's a whole number times a radical, you don't actually multiply those numbers, you just like stick them next to each other. So like on the top, I have a whole number and a radical, so I do not combine them. I just write them next to each other, 7 and square root of 3, just like we would put, like if it was 7 times x, we would put 7x, same thing. On the bottom, I have a square root and a square root, so I can actually multiply the numbers on the inside. 3 times 3, it's 9. Oh, but the square root of 9, if I type that in Desmos, if I type square root of 9, it's actually 3. So that's why we multiply by that number, so that it gets rid of the square root sign and it just turns into that number, okay? So then when it says simplify if possible, you have to see, can your whole numbers simplify? So that means you're going to type it in Desmos to see if it turns into something else. So that's an S for Desmos. So I'm typing in the calculator, I'm typing the 7 divided by 3, because I can't, I can simplify a whole number with a whole number. I cannot simplify a whole number and a radical. So I'm going to type 7 divided by 3 in the calculator. 7 divided by 3, it's a decimal, so I push the little button to make it a fraction. It stays the same. So that means it does not simplify. And final answer is 7 square root of 3 over 3. Okay? We are doing lots more examples together. So if you missed it that time, you can still catch it. So here we go. The next example, so here's my fraction. I need to get rid of what's in the bottom. So right now in the bottom is square root of 2. So how do I get rid of it? Well, I'm going to multiply by that on the top and the bottom. Okay, the top, I have a whole number and a radical. They do not go together. I just put them next to each other. On the bottom, radical and radical, I can actually multiply that. 2 times 2, it's 4. But the square root of 4, if I typed it in Desmos, square root of 4 is 2. Okay, so this is really 6 square root of 2 over 2. And then I'm checking, does 6 divided by 2, can that turn into something else? So we're going to type that in the calculator. 6 divided by 2 is 3. So yes, it can turn into something else. So really, this is going to turn into 3, and the square root of 2 is still there. Square root of 2, and that's final answer. Because I don't have fraction anymore, so I don't have to worry about, is there a square root still in the bottom? Okay, let's look at the next one. The next one on the bottom, I have a square root of 5, so I need to get rid of that. So I'm going to do times square root of 5 on the bottom and on the top. Now this time on the top, I already had a square root in the top. So I'm not just, I'm going to put the numbers next to each other like I did in number 1, because it was a whole number and a radical. This one, I have a radical, so I can put the radicals together, and I'm actually going to do 2 times 5. And 2 times 5 is 10, so I put that on the inside. This number on the outside stays on the outside. On the bottom, 5 times 5, you would type that in Desmos and you would get 25. And then when I type in the square root of 25 is 5. So right now I have 10 square root of 10 over 5, we said. Okay, last step, I'm checking, can I simplify 10 divided by 5? Well, I put 10 divided by 5. It says it's 2. So final answer, this turns into 2 square root of 10. Okay. Here we go. On the next one, in the bottom, I don't just have a square root this time. So do I need to get rid of the 3 from the bottom? No. I only need to get rid of the radical. The bottom can be a whole number. That's fine. So in this one, what am I going to multiply? Well, I'm going to multiply by the radical part of the bottom. So square root of 2 on the top and the bottom. On the top, that's a whole number and a radical. They do not go together. I just put them next to each other. On the bottom, I have a whole number and a radical times a radical. So I know my radicals go together, and 3 is just hanging out. I'm going to stick that in the front because I'm not actually going to do it with the radical 2 times radical 2. These two, I put them together. 2 times 2, I can actually multiply. That's 4. And I know square root of 4, that should turn into something else. Square root of 4 is 2. So what does this really turn into? The top stays the same. The bottom, I have 3. This part just turned into a 2. So that's multiplying times 2. Well, I can do 3 times 2. I'm continuing down over here. So 9 square root of 2 is still on the top. 3 times 2 is 6. And then the last step, can I simplify the top and the bottom of the fraction? So I'm typing that in Desmos. 9 divided by 6. Oh, it's a decimal, so I push the fraction. It does turn into something else. 3 over 2. So now in my answer, I put 3 on the top, 2 on the bottom, and square root of 2 goes on the top. Final answer. I do not simplify square root of 2 and a regular 2. This is a radical, this is not. They cannot simplify. Okay, the last one over here is a little more complicated because on the bottom is radical 24. Now 24 is a pretty big number. So I should simplify this before I start trying to get rid of the square root of the bottom. Now when I say simplify, what does that mean? Well, that means I need to break it down into the factors. So 24, I would try to divide by 2. It works. It turns into 2 and 12. I try to divide 12 by 2. It works. Gives me 6. 6 divided by 2 is 3. And all of these are prime, so I'm done. So I need to make my little groups. So I have one group of 2, and then these are my leftovers. So instead of having square root of 24 on the bottom, I really have, well, this is my pair, so that comes on the outside 2. And then my 2 and 3 are still stuck on the inside, so I would multiply them back together, and it gives me 6. So when I'm trying to get rid of the square root in the bottom, I only need to get rid of the 6. I don't need to get rid of this 2. So to get rid of the 6, I'm doing times square root of 6 times square root of 6. So here we go. On the top, I have a whole number and a radical. I know the radicals go together. So my 2 is still sitting out there. 3 times 6 is 18. On the bottom, I have my whole number, radical, so my whole number stays out there. 6 times 6 is 36. I type square root of 36 in Desmos because I can't have radicals in the bottom anymore. That's why we're doing this whole thing. 36, and I get 6. Where are you? So that turns into 2 square root of 18 That's still the same. On the bottom, I had this 2. Square root of 36 just turned into a 6. So I need to do 2 times 6. So we're going to continue this right here. So 2 times 6 is actually 12. So I have 2 square root of 18 over 12. Now before I type 2 divided by 12 in the calculator, I'm going to do the same thing, simplify square root of 18, because square root of 18 is a big number, and you can divide 18 by some of our prime numbers. So we're going to do that. So square root of 18, I'm going to do that right here. So square root of 18, we try dividing. I can divide by 2 and 9. 9 I cannot divide by 2 because it gives me 4.5, but I can divide by 3 and it gives me another 3. And I cross this out because I divided it. So my pair is 3. My 2 is left over. So on the top, I had the 2 before. Now, instead of square root of 18, I'm putting, what was my pair was a 3, square root of 2. These two outside numbers, if there's multiple, we multiply them. The 12 is still on the bottom. 2 times 3, we type that in the calculator, it gives us 6, square root of 2. The bottom's 12. Now I'm typing 6 divided by 12. 6 divided by 12 is 0.5. I turn that into a fraction. It's 1 over 2. So that would be 1 square root of 2 over 2. If it's just a 1 in the front, I don't have to put the 1. So final answer would be square root of 2 over 2. And that's the end of that question. Now that's probably the hardest it's ever going to be for you. Hopefully it's not this complicated all the time. If you have questions while you're doing it, make sure you're asking. Otherwise, you can go ahead and get started with the practice.